everybody, and welcome to the April 20th meeting 2024 of the Metropolitan Study Group of the SRIA. And today I'm delighted to introduce Frater Bharat Epur. And Bharat will be speaking on the subject, is this correct, Bharat, of mind, body and soul?
Yeah, the body, mind and soul.
Body, mind and soul. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to make sure that we're in the correct view for the recording purposes. Yes, we are. And so over to you, Bharat.
Okay. Good afternoon, Frater, all over the world, wherever you are. My first visit to the Atlantis bookshop, which I've been threatening to come here for some time, and today has been the day. And I thank Alistair, first of all, because it was through him that I got into the SRIA. And of course, my chief adept, Alex, Sheen, and Matt have been with me through my journey through the SRIA. Thank you very much for holding my hand. And also for giving me this opportunity of sharing my thoughts on the subject today, the body, mind, and soul. Frater, this Masonic paper of mine is just a mild attempt to examine the basic elements that make up a man: the body, the mind, and the soul, and whether there is something that requires an unveiling of some hitherto concealed inner meanings. I would also like to delve into any interconnection between them and what relationship they enjoy betwixt them in any combination. I'm now going to switch on my PowerPoint. Okay, now, as somebody from India, it would be natural to examine these matters from an Indian or an Oriental point of view, but that would indeed be limiting. I would also like to extend my researches from the Western or the Occidental tradition. As I'm writing this paper for presenting at a meeting of the Metropolitan Study Group under the auspices of the SRIA, I would further explore the lessons drawn from both. Finally, it would be remiss on my part if I were not to connect this subject to craft Freemasonry, which after all is the root of our fraternity and the subsequent trajectory we have taken therein. I pray that you will get as much pleasure and satisfaction in reading it as I did in writing this. The body, the mind, and the soul are all important because they are interconnected and contribute to our overall well-being as well as our own identity. The concept of the body, mind, and spirit connection highlights the true wellness that comes from addressing all three aspects of our nature. Here's why each of them is essential. The body is more than just a vessel. The physical body is an integral part of our well-being. Stress, emotions can manifest physically, such as headaches when stressed or experiencing depression when exercise routines are interrupted. Taking care of our bodies through exercise, proper nutrition, and self-care activities like massages or pampering can positively impact our mental and emotional states. The mind is basically harnessing the power within. The mind is the epicenter of our thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and perceptions. It is a powerful tool that can either propel us forward or hold us back. Stress, anxiety, and depression can affect our bodies and vice versa. Mindfulness practices such as meditation and self-reflection can help manage stress, improve focus, and contribute to a more balanced state of mind. The soul is actually discovering our true essence. The soul, often considered the core of our being, is an intangible force that connects us to our true essence. It encompasses our values, our passions, purpose, and spirituality. Nurturing the soul involves exploring our inner selves, aligning with our values, and embracing activities that ignite our passions. By nurturing the soul, we can find inner peace, meaning, and a sense of purpose that extends beyond material pursuits. The mind-body-spirit connection acknowledges that we are more than just our thoughts. We are indeed a complex combination of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects that shape our identity and our health. Taking care of all these aspects helps create balance, wellness, and a greater sense of self.
The wheel, just use the wheel.
Now, what is a body? If the question seems ridiculous to you, you're undoubtedly not alone. At any given time, in any given culture, most people have an intuitive, if not always easy to articulate, notion of what a body is. And they probably regard that notion as shared by all human beings. The fact is, however, that human cultures have not only done an amazing variety of things to human bodies, but have imagined and experienced the nature, limits, and capacities of the human body and its relation to the self in extremely diverse ways. The body has been a central concern for Indian religions and philosophies. On the one hand, being a positive evaluation in some traditions as the vehicle of the journey to liberation. In Sanskrit, the word for liberation is moksha, or enlightenment, which means bodha. On the other hand, being given as a negative evaluation in some traditions as a restriction or confinement of the soul from which it must break free. Most traditions that we designate by the term Hindu have understood the universe in cyclical terms as going through periods of creation and destruction over and over again. As part of the cyclic process, the soul or the Atman is believed to be reincarnated in different bodies, both animal and human, according to its action, which is karma. Thus, the kind of body that a being has is constrained and determined by the actions in the past. The body, along with its pleasure and suffering, is a result of previous action in a former life. Some traditions think that the soul can be set free from the confinement of the body through meditation and ritual, while some yoga traditions have believed that the body can achieve immortality or at least great longevity. In popular or folk Hinduism, the body is important as the focus of a deity in ritual possession, making the body analogous to the icon or the murti or the idol in the temple. In some forms of Hinduism, the body is theologically important in being part of the body of God, and conversely, as symbolically contained the cosmos within it. The body is also of central importance sociologically. The kind of body a person has is determining feature of the endogamous social group or the caste or the jati to which he or she belongs. Thus, caste is a property of the body that one is born with, although according to some tantric and devotional traditions, caste is eradicated at initiation, which is diksha, and also at the formal renunciation, which is sannyasa. Apart from the socio-religious and ritual concerns, the body has been the focus of medical discourse. The Ayurveda that cannot be separated from general Hindu cosmological and philosophical categories. When you look at the general literature on the body in the humanities and social sciences, is relevant for understanding the body as conceptualized in Hinduism. The turn to the body as a focus for research began in the 1970s. And there's a large amount of literature focused on it in anthropology, cultural studies, philosophy, sociology, and other studies. The body in religions has been an important theme in recent decades. Related to a discourse about the body is a discourse about gender, and this is also becoming an increasing focus of attention. For example, most people living in the early 21st century, especially in the West, believe the body to be a border between the self and the external world, and one that houses only one individual self. Those whose experience departs from this are treated as suffering from a personality disorder. Many non-Western cultures, however, in contrast, do not regard the skin as an impermeable border between the individual and the natural world, and believe that the physical body may host multiple selves. For example, most people living in the 21st century, let me go back a bit. From the significance of the body parts to contemporary theory of the body, different conceptions bound. Neither race nor gender nor sexuality is a universally uniform category. Different cultures imagine different organs as the center of bodily functioning and privilege different senses. Among the Suya tribe of Brazil, for example, hearing is equated with understanding. And this is commonly in Europe, seeing. For Europeans, it is seeing, and same it is for the North Americans. So in the case of the Brazilians, it's hearing, while as in the case of the Americans and the Europeans, it's seeing. And while contemporary biologists attempt to map a basic genetic blueprint, post-structuralists argue that the very notion of a biological body is nothing more than a human invention. Moving on to the mind. Once again, from the Western point of view, there's a clear distinction between mind and matter. In the Indian philosophical tradition, mind helps in knowing consciousness, whereas in the Western paradigm, mind becomes the subject as well as the object of knowing. Now let us look at it from the Hindu tradition. The mind may be viewed to be constituted by 5 basic components. The first is manas, which translates as thought. The second is ahamkara, which is ego. The third is chitta, which is consciousness. The fourth is buddhi, which is intellectual faculty to form and retain concepts, to reason, to discern, to judge, to comprehend, and to understand. And then, of course, the last one is Atman, which is the real self or the innermost essence. And this is sometimes loosely understood as the soul. And these cannot be reduced to gross elements. A little bit further on each of these aspects. The manas is the lower mind, which collects sense impressions. Its perceptions shift from moment to moment. The sensory motor mind obtains its inputs from the senses of hearing, touch, sight, taste, and smell. Each of these senses may be taken to be governed by a separate agent. Now, manas, ahamkara, and buddhi are collectively called the internal instruments, which is the antakarana. And these are the internal instruments of the mind. Next, we come to the chitta, which is actually the memory bank of the mind. These memories constitute the foundation on which the rest of the mind operates. Manas is considered the lord of the senses because it directs the senses and keeps them moving around the external objects. Manas is also one of the higher tattvas or principles or reality of truth. And these are the tattvas of nature. And these realities are above the elements and above the senses. Thus, a person who has a very stable mind is called Strita Prajna. And according to the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the person who has the Strita Prajna is alone qualified for liberation. Now, once again, according to Hindu psychology, the mind has three primary powers. The first is the Ichha Sakti, which is the power of volition, desire nature, a sensation, also known as a Vedana Sakti. The second is the Jnana Sakti, which is the power of cognition, that is, thinking, understanding, and processing data, as well as remembering that. And the last is the Kriya Sakti. This is the power of voluntary and involuntary actions. As you can see on the diagram on the right of the screen, it shows you the expanding ellipses of these three particular powers. Ichha Shakti is the emotive capacity of an individual, which includes feeling, emotion, and the desire nature based upon the Jnana Shakti, which is the acquiring or processing of sensory data, of learning, of knowing, and of remembering. Then feeling and knowledge can then be formulated into a plan and put into action through the Kriya Shakti. Kriya means to do, to act. In lower life forms, these three powers are contracted, whereas in human beings, they're much more expanded. There are, you talk about the Jnana Shakti, there are again 5 sub-powers associated with the Jnana Shakti. The first is the Bhavana Shakti, which is the power of awareness, imagination, or conceptualization. In Manasha Shakti, the power of cogitation, reflection, assessment, judgment, comparison, inference. In Sankalpa Shakti, the power of formulating intention and resolution. In Smarana Shakti, the power of remembrance and recall. And in Dharana Shakti, the power of concentration. While on the subject of classifications, we can mention the characteristics of the mind. The mind can have parinama, which is a vacillation, a constant change, flitting from one thing to the other. In Chesta, the general and perpetual activity, which is the internal dialogue which is constantly going on, but not in the front, but in the background. And Dharma, which is characterization and classification of stuff, which facilitates easy understanding and memory. Then we have Nirodha, which is the repression of undesirable or painful thoughts and memories. And finally, we have Shakti, which is the ideation, which is transformed into action. As you can quite imagine, the mind is constantly flitting from one thing to another, and there is an internal dialogue. Sometimes we refer to it as the monkey mind, never still. We are also frequently changing our minds, hesitating, vacillating. Our thinking also takes place through a process of classification and categorization. Creation of stereotypes which help us to cope with life without the need for deep analysis of everything we encounter. Repression is the subconscious inhibition or exclusion of painful memories or undesirable desires. The power of the mind, as you can well imagine, is unfathomable. Now let us take a closer look at the mind from the Indian perspective. According to Nyaya Vaisyatika philosophy, there are 7 kinds of ultimate realities, which are the padartha. They are substance, which is dravya, quality, which is guna, action or motion, which is karma, genus or universality, which is the samanya, species or speciality, which is the vishesha, inheritance, which is samavaya, or negation, which is abhava. According to the famous sage Virupakshananda, the substances are not 5, but they are 9 in number. And these substances are earth, air, water, fire, and ether, which all of us are familiar with. These are the objective elements as we can perceive them by our senses. And the balance are time, space, mind or manas, and finally self or Atman. The mind becomes the instrument of experience, such as happiness, which is sukha. And unhappiness, which is dukkha. It is also an object of experience with other senses. The self is itself the basis and substratum of consciousness as well as experience. But in reality, it is unconsciousness in nature. The self becomes consciousness when it is associated with the mind. Birth means the association of the self with the body, and death means the disassociation of self from the body. The self is eternal. The existence of self is proved by the theory of causation. God or Ishvara becomes the efficient cause of the world. In the Samakya philosophy, it consists of two ultimate realities. They are the self, also known as the Purusha, and the primordial nature, which is Prakriti. Prakriti consists of three attributes or gunas, which are Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, which are always in a state of equilibrium, or equally, they could be in a state of non-equilibrium. So this is the duality. The activity of gunas result in evolution. The first product of evolution is cosmic intelligence, which is buddhi. Ego, which all of us are familiar with, is also an evolute of primordial nature, which is prakriti. And it manifests based on the predominance of the three gunas I mentioned earlier, which are sattva, rajas, and tamas. In the Samakya philosophy, the mind evolves as a sattva aspect or attributes of the gunas. It evolves with the 5 organs of perception. And what are they? Hearing, touch, sight, taste, and smell. It also has 5 organs of motion. What are they? The hands, the feet, speech, the excretory organ, and the generative organ. The subtle or the rasa tanmatra, or the atomic parts of the sense perception, evolves with the tamas aspects of these 3 attributes. The combination of this helps for the rajas become an aspect of the mind itself. The mind also carries out the order of will, which is ichcha, and becomes an instrument in the actions of the individual. According to Vijnana Bhikshu, who was a commentator of the Samakya Pravachana Sutra, according to him, intelligence or buddhi is the storehouse of all subconsciousness and all subconscious impressions. The buddhi consists of the 3 gunas and acts upon the individual. Now, all of us are familiar with the word yoga. Yoga actually deals with the control of thought waves of the mind. According to Patanjali, the person who is supposed to be the father of yoga, he has a sutra or a mantra. It says Yoga Chitrarthi Nirodha, which according to a much later period scholar who was born as Narendranath Dutt and was initiated, passed and raised in Lodge Anchor and Hope in Calcutta, later on took the name of Swami Vivekananda. According to him, the mind apparatus chitta is a combination of 3 components, namely manas, buddhi, and ahamkara, and the sensory organs. Manas, according to him, is an aspect of chitta which receives all the impressions from the outside world. Buddhi is the determinative faculty which distinguishes between good and bad, and the righteous and unrighteous aspects of things as well as of thoughts. Ahamkara is an egoistic aspect of mind and personality which owns those impressions. Even according to yoga, mind is unconscious and only reflects the consciousness, the self or the Purusha. Thus, the knowledge perceived as a result of our experience with the outside world is only an objective experience, and the self is not associated with it at all. The experience with the outside world are the result of objects. Senses contact the external world, mind, ego, and buddhi. Hence, a person suffers from joy, sukha, or from sorrow, which is dukkha, as well as from delusion, which is moha. And all this happened as a result of the creation of the thought waves of the mind. However, amidst these experiences, the Purusha remains untouched, pure, enlightened, and free. The dormant state of the mind is called samskara, which is the mental impressions, which change with the personality of the individual. The samskaras give rise to the thought waves, and these any crudely could be compared to the negative film roll in a camera. They're expressed in one's life based on the actions or karma of the past, as well as the present life, of the present upbringing, the environment in which you were brought up, as well as the education which you had. Hence, bad samskaras have to be destroyed by the discipline of the body and the mind. And Swami Vivekananda, based on an ancient Sanskrit verse, says that mind again is like a maddened monkey, and it should be controlled by practice every day over a period of time, until at last the mind will be under perfect control. This continuous practice leads to concentration, which is dharana, and is defined by the Patanjali sage as holding the mind onto the same object. The practice must be undertaken not by yourself, but under the strict supervision of a qualified teacher. Now, let me move on a little bit more. I think I covered this. Okay. Now, there's another person called Boja who's a commentator. He discovered 5 types of mind which have aptitude for yoga. They are the scattered mind, which is the Shipta, the dull mind, which is the Mudha, the average mind, which is the Vikshipta, one-pointed mind, which is the Ekagra, and the concentrated mind, which is Niruddha. People who are having the first 3 types are not suited for higher practices of yoga. Sattva mind, nature of mind predominates in the 4th type, and the last has pure and serene nature, in which Purusha gets absorbed. Then illumination alone can arise in the mind. The ignorance of one's own existence brings misery as a result of egoism and prevents a person from experiencing a glimpse of consciousness. Mind is only an instrument of perception and experience, and it reflects consciousness, whereas Purusha is the sufferer or enjoys as a result of thought waves. The Mimamsa philosophy considers self as distinct from the body, the senses, as well as the mind. Intelligence, will, which is ichcha, and effort, which is prayatna, are the natural attributes of the self. The philosophy of mind is a branch of philosophy that deals with the nature of the mind and its relation to the body and the external world. The mind and body problem is a paradigmatic issue in the philosophy of mind, although a number of other issues are addressed as well, such as the hard problem of consciousness and the nature of particular mental states. Aspects of the mind that are studied include mental events, mental functions, mental properties, consciousness, and its neural correlates. The ontology of the mind, the nature of cognition and thought, and the relationship of the body to the mind. Let us now take a look at the relationship of mind and body. Many cultural systems, Zen Buddhism in particular, do not mark a radical distinction between mind and body. In contrast, mind-body dualism has been so thoroughly integrated into the fabric of Western culture that some may have difficulty imagining an experience of the self that does not partake of it. Since the ancient Greeks, a binary opposition between the body and the soul has been a basic framework of Western philosophy. People tend to consider their bodies as matter without thoughts and as fundamentally different from their souls and minds. In the philosophy of mind-body dualism denotes either the view that mental phenomena are non-physical or that the mind and body are distinct and separable. Thus, it encompasses a set of views about the relationship between mind and matter, as well as between subject and object, and is contrasted with other positions such as physicalism, inactivism in the mind-body problem. Let us take a quick look at dualism and monism. The two central schools of thought on the mind-body problem, although nuanced views have arisen and do not fit one or the other category neatly. Dualism finds its entry into Western philosophy thanks to René Descartes in the 17th century. Substance dualists like Descartes argue that the mind is an independently existing substance, whereas property dualists maintain that the mind is a group of independent properties that emerge from and cannot be reduced to the brain, but that it is not a distinct substance. Monism is the position that mind and body are ontologically indiscernible entities, not dependent substances. This view was exposed by the 17th century rationalist Baruch Spinoza. Physicalists argue that only entities postulated by physical theory exist, and that mental processes will eventually be explained in terms of these entities as physical theory continues to evolve. Physicalists maintain various positions on the prospects of reducing mental properties to physical properties, many of whom adopt compatible forms of property dualism. And the ontological status of such mental properties remains unclear. Idealists maintain that the mind is all that exists and that the external world is either mental itself or an illusion created by the mind. Neutral monists such as Ernest Mach and William James argue that events in the world can be thought of as either mental, what is psychological, or physical, depending on the network of relationships into which they enter. And dual aspect monists such as Spinoza adhere to the position that there is some other neutral substance and that both matter and mind are properties of this unknown substance. The most common monisms in the 20th and 21st centuries have all been variations of physicalism. These positions include behaviorism, the type identity theory, anomalous monism, and functionalism. Most modern philosophers of mind adopt either a reductive physicalist or a non-reductive physicalist position, maintaining in their different ways that the mind is not something separate from the body. These approaches have been particularly influential in the sciences, especially in the recent times in the fields of sociobiology, computer science, especially artificial intelligence, evolutionary psychology, and the various neurosciences. Reductive physicalists assert that all mental states and properties will eventually be explained by scientific accounts of physiological processes and states. The non-reductive physicalists argue that although the mind is not a separate substance, mental properties supervene on physical properties, or that the predicates and vocabulary used in mental descriptions and explanations are indispensable and cannot be reduced to the language and lower level explanations of physical science. Continued neuroscientific progress has helped to clarify some of these views. However, they are far from being resolved, and modern philosophers of mind continue to ask how the subjective qualities and intentionality of mental states and properties can be explained in naturalistic terms. The problems of physical theorists of the mind have led some contemporary philosophers to assert that the traditional view of substance dualism should be defended. From this perspective, this theory is coherent, and problems such as the interaction of the mind and body can be rationally resolved. Now, I have one more piece of thing I want to talk about is the dualism in the mind-body problem. The mind-body problem concerns the explanation of the relationship that exists between minds or mental processes and bodily states, as well as the processes involved. The main aim of the philosophers working in this area has been to determine the nature of the mind and mental states or processes, and how, or even if, the minds are affected by and how they can affect the body. Dualism is concerned and contrasted with various kinds of monism. Substance dualism is contrasted with all forms of materialism. But property dualism may be considered as a form of emergent materialism or non-reductive physicalism in some sense. Now, again, comparing Western and Indian traditions, dualism is a set of views about the relationship between mind and matter, or the body, matter and body being interchangeable. It begins with the claim that mental phenomena are in some respects non-physical. And one of the earliest known formulations of mind-body dualism was expressed in the Eastern Samakya or the Yoga schools of Hindu philosophy going back to 650 BCE. This, again, as I said earlier, divided the world into Purusha, which is the mind or the spirit, and the Prakriti, which is the material substance. And specifically, again, the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali presents this analytical approach. In Western philosophy, the earliest discussions of dualist ideas are in the writings of Plato, who suggested that humans' intelligence, which is a faculty of the mind and soul, could not be identified or explained in terms of either their physical body, and however, the best known version of dualism, as I said earlier, is again Descartes, and upholds that the mind is a non-extended, non-physical substance. And he says that Descartes was the first to clearly identify the mind with consciousness and self-awareness, and to distinguish this from the brain, which was the seat of intelligence. He was therefore the first to formulate mind-body problem in the form in which it still exists today. Perceptual experiences depend on stimuli that arrive at our various sensory organs from the external world. And these stimuli cause change in our mental states, ultimately causing us to feel some sort of a sensation, which may be either pleasant or unpleasant. Someone's desire for a slice of pizza, for example, will tend to cause that person to move his or her body in a specific manner and in a specific direction to obtain what he or she wants. The question then is how it can be possible for conscious experiences to arise out of a lump of gray matter endowed with nothing but electrochemical properties. A related problem is how someone's propositional attitude, that is, beliefs and desires, cause that individual's neurons to fire and the muscles to contract. These comprise some of the puzzles that have confronted epistemologists and philosophers of mind right from the time of Descartes. As mentioned earlier, Dualism is closely associated with the thought of Descartes, who held that mind is a non-physical and therefore non-spatial substance. Descartes clearly identified mind with consciousness and self-awareness, and he distinguished this from the physical brain as the seat of intelligence. Hence, again, as I said, he was the first documented Western philosopher to formulate the mind-body problem in the way it exists even today. Moving onwards to other philosophers from the Occident, James Christian, a contemporary American philosopher, raises an important assumption about the Western dilemma and the Judeo-Christian assumptions spanning 2 millennia with respect to matter, mind, and God. To quote him, he says, "What has received by the infinite mind cannot be comprehended by finite minds. The mysteries of faith will remain beyond our grasp, for we see through a glass darkly. Our purpose in life should not be to analyze the infinite or synthesize life's engagements. Rather, our goal should be to get into a right relationship with God, to do His will through faith, and to look forward to an eternity which will transcend this mortal existence." Unquote. Other Western philosophers, from Socrates to Hume, face the same dilemma, the problem of matter, mind, and God, and came out with their own philosophical explanations. From Descartes, the mind and body were separate substances, just as thought and extension were separate entities, whereas soul, in his view, was present in the pineal gland or the brain, which comes into contact with the vital spirits and through which it interacts with the body, whereas Hobbes reduced mind to bodies in motion and achieved the unity of human. Descartes, in his famous dictum, "Cogito ergo sum," I think, therefore I am, included sensory perception such as feeling. However, he failed to resolve the problem of mind-body interaction or unity. Now, as far as Spinoza is concerned, human became an innate version of God. He is a mode of God's attributes of thought and extension. For A.N. Whitehead, body and mind became societies or nexus, which are sets of actual entities. The aggregates of actual entities which are uncreated, where patterns and qualities such as shapes and colors of qualities or objects, including roundness, greenness, redness, courage, fear, timidity, were all present. The timeless actual entity, according to A.N. Whitehead, was called God. According to him, God is the poet of the world, with tender patience leading it by his vision of truth, beauty, and goodness. Going back to Plato, he came with a theory of ideas or forms or patterns after which things were made. According to this theory, matter is constantly changing and is only an appearance. He assumed that things were ordered by mind, and this cosmos became the actuality of the world soul in receptacle. The receptacle was a matrix which had to do structure but was capable of receiving the structure by some kind of outside craftsman or a demiurge. Demiurge, again, God. The word soul was eternal, just like the soul in the body of a man. According to Immanuel Kant, mind brings something to the objects in experiences regularly. He visualized mind as a very active agent doing something with the object it experiences. For Kant, thinking involved not only receiving impressions through our senses, but also making judgments about what we experienced. An old friend, Sigmund Freud, believed that human personality is exhibited through the interaction of three dynamic systems, namely the id, the ego, and the superego. Id was the whole complex of our physical and psychic needs. Driven by emotion, it operates on the pleasure principle, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. The superego is a system of moral values acquired through interaction with the world, whereas the ego is a psychic system that operates on the reality principle and mediates between the ego and the superego. He said that when Eid is in command, individuals get a sense of wholeness, effectiveness, and well-being. Freud also discovered that there existed the unconscious mind apart from the conscious mind. So, several philosophers over the ages have propounded several theories attempting to give their explanation of this problem. I do not wish to elaborate any further on in this paper. I'll now move on to the next part. But before doing that, let me just summarize this section because it's been rather long. In Indian philosophy, both mind, manas, and matter, dravya, are placed in the same category as they become the objects of knowledge. However, in the Western tradition, both are based on a clear distinction between mind and matter. In the Indian philosophical tradition, mind helps in knowing consciousness, whereas in the Western paradigm, mind becomes the subject as well as the object of knowing. Knowing gives an understanding of the truth and could lead to realization. In the Indian philosophy, knowing becomes a being and becoming. The knowledge of the self, Atman, the knowledge, sorry, I missed. Yeah. In the Indian philosophy, knowing becomes a being and unbecoming. And knowledge of the self, Atman, helps the individual in attaining happiness, which is Sukha, welfare, which is Abhyuda in the world, and realization of the supreme reality, which is Brahman, which leads ultimately to liberation, which is moksha. Thus, knowing and understanding about consciousness becomes complementary in both Western and Indian philosophical and psychological systems. The approach may be different, but the end result is more or less same. Moving on to the last part, the soul. People use the term the soul in a range of ways, not always precisely, which can make it difficult for others to grasp exactly what the word means to religious believers. Some people use the term soul and spirit interchangeably. Others talk of the body and soul, or body and mind. However, when people speak of someone having a good mind, they mean something very different from when they say someone has a good soul. And again, when people say someone is good in spirit, the blurring of these terms can often make discussion of the soul confusing. In the philosophical sense, the soul is mainly used as meaning the same as self, to refer to the subject of mental states and of spiritual experience. However, the self has a wider meaning than the soul, as the idea of the self can include mind and body together as one coherent person, whereas the soul is usually referred to means a particular aspect of the self. The part that, according to religious believers, is capable of having a relationship with God and which carries on the possibility of living after death. For the some, the soul is the most important aspect of human nature. For others, the idea of the soul makes no sense. Once again, let's take a look at it from the perspective of the monists and the dualists. The dualists believe that there are two aspects to human beings, a physical body and a non-physical soul. They tend to believe in life after death. For monists or the materialists, believe that human beings are made of one substance, the physical body. They reject the concept of life after death. There is no scientific evidence for the soul. They believe in only one substance, that is matter, and therefore dualism is incorrect, as it postulates the existence of matter and a non-physical substance. A person's identity is inextricably linked to their physical body. So when the body dies, their life ends. They contend that all experiences, emotions, and thoughts are derived from our brains and that everything can be explained by the mental activity of the brain. The materialist argument for not accepting survival after death may be summarized as follows. 1. Life depends on a functioning brain, a nervous system, and a physical body. 2. Death involves the destruction of the brain, the nervous system, and the physical body. 3. Therefore, a person's life ends at death, as without a physical form, life cannot be supported. Now, Aristotle and Plato both shared the view of multiple souls. They further elaborated a hierarchical arrangement corresponding to the distinctive functions of plants, animals, and humans. A nutritive soul of growth and metabolism that all three share a perceptive soul of pain, of pleasure, and of desire that only humans and other animals share, and the faculty of reason that is unique to humans only. In this view, a soul is a form of a viable organism wherein each level of the hierarchy formally supervenes upon the substance of the preceding level. For Aristotle, the first two souls based on the body perish when the living organism dies, whereas there remains an immortal and perpetual intellective part of mind. For Plato, however, the soul was not dependent on the physical body. He believed in metempsychosis, the migration of the soul to a new physical body. It has been considered a form of reductionism by some philosophers, since it enables a tendency to ignore very big groups of variables by its assumed association with the mind or the body, and not for its real value when it comes to explaining or predicting a studied phenomenon. Now, Atman in Hinduism is the universal eternal self, the individual soul that resides within the essential self. The self is the witness or observer of an individual's actions and deeds. Atman is the macrocosmic essence of Brahman, the macrocosmic essence of the universal spiritual force that permeates all things. The jivas or the souls are classified into three types: Baddha, Mukta, and Nitya. Baddhas are the people who are enslaved to the faculties and caught in the swirl of the sea of samsara, taking repeated births and deaths. Muktas are those people who are liberated and who enjoy divine bliss. In Sri Vaikunta, the abode of the Lord, Nityas are always in Sri Vaikunta rendering service, like Garuda, the official carrier, Adisesha, the reclining bed of the Lord, and Vishwaksena, the celestial who removes all obstacles. In a hurricane, many things are trapped and carried away by it. So is our mind with the faculties, and dragged by them, we develop egotism, self-pride, and arrogance. They can be overcome by practicing devotion. My brethren, fratres, I have dwelt at length on the body, mind, and soul. I also promise that I will bring in a bit of Freemasonry into this. Now, Matt Gallagher, with a Freemason with a particular interest in alchemy, has drawn the following analogy between body, mind, and soul and the alchemical trinity of salt, mercury, and sulfur. According to him, the salt is the body, representing the material plane, and earth, the mercury, is the mind, that quick, flowing emotional and reason of thought, and the sulfur is the soul, representing the transformative fire that creates and destroys and creates again. He further states that they may be linked to speculative wages of a Freemason, and salt, representing all things earthly, can be linked to corn. Mercury, associated with the spirit, unsurprisingly represents spirits or wine, and sulfur, the representative oil, which makes sense as both are associated with the flame. So your wages of corn, wine, and oil are, in a sense, wages of salt, mercury, and sulfur, or the body, mind, and soul. He goes on to elaborate as follows, quote, "How are my wages as a fellow crafter of my mind, body, and soul? That's like saying you'll get paid in exposure by doing work for free. Well, first, your employer isn't the lodge or the foreman of your operative worksite. Your employer is your creator, and he has paid you in these three tools of mind, body, and soul. Second, just like your physical wages at your IRL job, they are not a gift to enjoy, but a tool to use to improve your life and the lives of your loved ones. So, how do we use these tools to improve those things? For that, I turn to the other place where 3 takes a permanent role, the 24-inch gauge. As I detail in my book, Practical Freemasonry, the 24-inch gauge represents not just a division of our time, but an equitable division of our attention to the 3 principal areas of life, the self, the tribe, and the society. So you're probably asking, can I shoehorn one into the other? Absolutely. The body is the most obvious physical representation of the self, as taking care of oneself is in great part a physical act. Sleeping well and eating well are physical. Mental and emotional health have a large physical component in brain chemistry and are as well affected by good food and sleep. Even spiritual health is partly a bodily act. The mind, being a home to our thoughts, memories, and experiences, fits snugly into our tribe, which includes our family, our friends, and the lodge, and which are those with whom we share those thoughts, those memories, and experiences. The soul is our representation into a much larger existence on a much higher plane, and these can be likened to our own presence in the society, where though we may not interact with or touch every other living soul, but we are an interwoven part of the fabric of society, contributing to the zeitgeist of the world. So what do we do with all these conspiratorial connections? Society, so that we may live in accordance with our best gifts and values. Thus, when considering our wages, we internalize that these areas of life which we must balance are in fact a gift from our Creator. Ourselves, our family and friends, and society are payments for the services rendered of playing our role in His grand design. And when we consider the sacred elements of salt, mercury, and sulfur, we know that to be truly actualized as a divine entity, we cannot solely live in the world of the soul, giving only thought to our spiritual being, nor can we get lost on the minutiae of the intellectual pursuits of Freemasonry or science, but most certainly cannot be totally absorbed in bodily pleasures or sensations, either from vices or hedonism, or even the virtues of clean living. Truth does not live in the body, the mind, or the soul. It lay in the center of the perfect equilateral triangle of all 3 in balance. This is what Matt Gallagher said. Now, in conclusion, I would like you to take you through the 3 craft degrees that all of you surely have gone through. Maybe some too far in the midst of time, some probably more recently. Consider the following analogy. The worshipful master represents the divine spirit, the senior warden the soul, and the junior warden the body. The question too and the answer from the junior warden shows that man's body is on guard against outside evil influences. The senior warden's reply shows that all assembled have made some spiritual progress and are fit for further advancement. The next 7 questions indicate the sevenfold nature of man and also show that 7 perfect a lodge, this being an astrological reference to our planetary system. The senior deacon stands for intuition, whereby the soul obtains its inspiration from the divine spirit. The junior deacon represents the physical means by which the soul, represented by the senior warden, passes on these inspirations received from the divine spirit or the virtual master to the material world. Hence, he represents intelligence in the 5 senses of man. The inner guard represents the power that permits the soul to enter into the flesh at any given moment. For spiritually, the inner guard represents that warning that must be given to those who attempt to probe without caution into the mysteries of God. The tiler represents the power that keeps up all evil passions and desires that a man's enemy from entering into the holy precincts. Major Powell, in his book The Magic of Freemasonry, deals with the psychological interpretations of the functions of the officers. He says, quote, "In Eastern psychological science, a fuller and more complex analysis of the psychological nature of man's being is to be found. Western psychology, though rapidly approaching it, is as yet not sufficiently defined to serve unaided," quote unquote. According to him, the worshipful master represents wisdom, buddhi. The senior warden represents strength or will, atma. The junior warden represents beauty or the creative mind, which is the higher manas. The senior deacon represents reason or intelligence, the lower manas. And the junior deacon represents desire or feeling, kama. The inner guard represents physical vitality or the brain, the prana or the linga sharira, or the etheric double. And the outer guard represents the physical body, which is the stula sharira. While the immediate past master represents matured wisdom or experience, which is derived from past acts and built into the nature of the karuna sharira, the causal body. He goes on to say in his book, the worshipful master calls his forces into being, elicits the three principal officers with the wisdom to guide, will to drive, and mind to conceive. These are static powers that require dynamic forces for transmission of power into acts, for which each has a mobile or a dynamic assistant, free to move about the floor of the lodge, carrying out the behests of the three chairs. Thus, wisdom, the worshipful master, directs reason, which is the senior deacon, and will, which is the senior warden, energizes desire, which is junior deacon, and mind, which is junior warden, stimulates the brain, which is the inner guard, which again passes into the physical body, thus producing action. Now, the switching gears, going to one of the Upanishads, the Kaushitaya Upanishad. The chapter 11 of that opens with this noteworthy passage. Quote, "The vital breath, prana, is Brahma, which means divine spirit. Of this, Brahma is the form of vital breath. The mind is the messenger, the speech, the server, the eye is the guard, and the ear is the gatekeeper. To this Brahma, in the form of vital breath, these power the senses being offerings, though he does not ask for them." The analogy between the above and the office of the lodge is remarkable. The symbolism of the principal officers as representing divine spirit, soul, and body has already been alluded to. I now draw your attention to the changes in regard to the relative positions of the square and compasses on the master's pedestal, which in my view confirm this. The compasses in the square represent the heaven and earth, and consequently the spirit and the body. In the first degree, the spirit is covered over with the body, which predominates in the first stage of human existence. In the second degree, one point is exposed, showing that the spirit as soul is struggling to gain full mastery over the body with the aid of the liberal arts and sciences. In the third degree, this consummation is reached through the gates of death by the soul obtaining liberation from the body on its way to union with the divine spirit. Similarly, the three knocks are said to represent the divine spirit, soul, and body, and teach the very same lesson. Freemasonry works for the complete atonement and perfect union of body and soul with the divine spirit. In the first degree, they are separate to show the separation of soul and body. In the second degree, the separation of the first two knocks, but the combination of the second and third indicate the union between the soul and body has taken place to form a complete man by the study of the liberal arts and sciences, thus paving the way for the true knowledge of the great architect of the universe. And finally, in the third degree, the combination of the first and second knocks and the separation of the third symbolizes the release of the soul from the body through the gates of death, and the combination of the soul with the divine spirit, thus leaving the base body aside. Frater, I've taken a bit of your time. I seek your pardon and indulgence, and I thank you for your patience in listening to the meanderings of a brother and frater in search of the self. Thank you, my frater. And these are, yeah.
I'll do that.
Yeah.
Let's get this back.
So firstly, Frater Bharat, thank you so much. That was a wonderful, wonderful paper. You've obviously poured many, many hours of love and care into that. I personally want to congratulate you. I thought the imagery that you collected for that presentation was absolutely amazing. There were some wonderful images in there. And yeah, thank you very much indeed. That was a fascinating presentation. I'd like to open this up, as we usually do, for everybody to have the opportunity to ask questions or to offer their comments or observations. So if you do wish to speak, please could you raise your hand via the reactions tab at the bottom of the screen. That'll just make my job a little bit easier to manage, please. So yes, go ahead. Anybody, if you'd like to make any comments or observations or questions for Frater Bharat, please go ahead.
Shin, I can't find, I'm raising my hand normally.
Go ahead, that's fine.
Bharat, that was just an absolutely fantastic, deep, dense, well-researched, wonderful, wonderful paper that encompassed so many different aspects and perspectives, and just absolutely wonderful. But it was more of an observation than a question. It is really just the in-depth understanding that the Hindu philosophical and psychological approach to understanding the mind that has been there for thousands of years just seems so much more advanced than the. It almost feels like the tinkering of the Western world in comparison with such ancient and in-depth understanding, and just the different classifications and aspects of the mind. I didn't realize what an in-depth classification system it was, and how well they understood all the different aspects of it. And I just thought that part of the presentation just actually quite blew me away, and made me realize that the West has a lot to learn from the in that perspective. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.
You can sit down.
Yeah.
You don't have to get out.
Okay. I think I'll continue sitting down. And thank you, first of all, Shane, for your comments and appreciation. And Alex, also thank you for your kind words. Now, just to kind of add a little bit to what I mentioned earlier. If you actually analyze it carefully, the logical result of the study and writings of both from the West and the East do coincide. It's not that they are vastly divergent. It's just that maybe in the East, in India, for example, they've had much more time to kind of analyze more in depth. So therefore, you have these various stratifications and classifications. The Western philosophy is actually, you can trace it to Greece. I think that's where it basically started off. So there is a time gap. So I think that's where we have these more in-depth, should I say, explorations into these subjects. I don't in any way mean to denigrate one or the other. That's not my intention at all. It's just I wanted to give you a different perspective from the East and the West, and see that there is a trajectory which meets. It's not that they're going in, far apart. That's not there at all. It's just that there are some gaps in the Western philosophy, and Western thinking, which could be helped to be filled by what we have learned from the East. And I think together is where we need to go. We can't separate one from the other. So it is to our benefit to get the best from both paths.
Thank you. And just wonderful presentation again, Bharat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.
Over to you, Brig.
Thank you, Shane. Barrett, an absolute feast of the mind, the body, and the soul. I'm still very confused as to where the mind is actually located. I have read a comment that it is in every single cell of our body. And I wouldn't dismiss this. However, I just want to concentrate because I've got a simple mind. I've been a member of the Theosophical Society for many years, and as you probably know, much of the Hindu teaching was taken by the originators and founders of the organization, especially with regard to body, mind, and soul. And they do place quite an emphasis on the higher self and the lower self. They maintain that the higher self is indestructible, it is infinite, unlike the lower self, that seat of the emotions, for argument's sake, that dissipates or dies with the death of their physical vehicle. Number one, would you agree with that assessment? And number two, would you agree as a generalization that Freemasonry completely and utterly fails its flock by being completely unable to differentiate between spirituality and religion, therefore teaching, for argument's sake, what you itemized as the worshipful master being divine spirit, the senior warden soul, junior warden, etc. As a generalization, I've only found one Freemason who is actually aware that these spiritual divisions actually exist and are meaningful in a lodge.
Brigadier, thank you for that intervention. Number one is I do agree with that idea of the lower and the upper higher self. That is, and the higher self is indestructible. That is something which is seared in my mind. I have no quarrel with that statement at all. And that is number one. Number two, about the second question which you raised is about Freemasonry. Has it lived up to its reputation, or has it not? I think, let me put it this way. I think it's for each one of us as an individual, as a Freemason, it's for us to go on a search for truth. If we like one of those sheep who just follow the leader, and we just go and attend our lodge meetings and then kind of blurt out the ritual and do a bit of pantomime there, then that's one way of enjoying Freemasonry. Go have a good meal and nothing more than that. Yeah. So that's probably okay. I mean, I don't want to denigrate that. As the particular Mason is enjoying his Masonry, that's fine. But those of the Masons who wish to kind of intellectualize and to question, to pursue a path of self-improvement, self-knowledge, I do believe that there are lots of hints in Freemasonic ritual which ought to be explored. The persons who wrote that ritual many centuries ago were not ordinary people. They were quite adept at that time. They have gathered many of the things which you can find in philosophy and religion and all that. Even spirituality itself is there, very much there. It's just that it's so well hidden. We talk about veiled in allegory. Sometimes the veil has been rather thick. People have not been able to penetrate that veil. So I think it's for us who have got inquiring minds to keep probing into that, trying to lift that veil. There are these lodges which I've come across which do make that attempt to pierce that veil. People who have look at the esoteric aspect of Freemasonry, the philosophical pursuit of knowledge. I think Masonry can provide an avenue for that, but it's an individual path. I don't think there is any overarching hierarchy which kind of guides you down that path. You and I know both that the way the Freemasonic structure is, the top-down approach, Grand Lodge and provincial Grand Lodge and so on and so forth. That's more administrative. It's not for personal growth.
Thank you very much, Bharat.
Thank you very much, Brig. I would just like to draw your attention to my mother lodge is called the Lodge of the Double Horizon, and that was born out of the Dormer Masonic Study Circle that was founded in 1938. The purpose of the Dormer is to create an opportunity for Freemasons with an esoteric leaning to investigate the deeper meaning of the symbolism and the allegory and the rituals themselves. So that's very central to the way the Lodge of the Double Horizon functions. And so I would really direct anybody who's interested in that, particularly to the Dormer Masonic Study Circle. And I'll be happy to forward details if you're interested.
I would applaud that, Shane. I have actually joined them and found the record of their work and continuing work inspirational from the esoteric perspective.
Wonderful. That's great news, Brig. I'm glad to hear that. We have Amit Sen in Sydney. Welcome to you. Please go ahead.
Frater Bharat, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you very much for that. Going back to a very previous comment about there being enough indicators in the craft ritual, a very simple and a very common phrase which is thrown in there. We talk of a temple, eternal in the heavens, not made with hands. Very direct pointer, and very few people realize and think about it. Going back to Briggs' comment, actually, also.
Yeah, thank you, Amit. Good to see you. I don't know what time of the day it is in your part of the world.
It's about 1 a.m.
Oh, wow. Okay. The thing is, please remember the allegory of King Solomon's temple, which is the foundation of our craft. The temple is just, not some mythological place somewhere in the distant past. The temple is you. So the idea of building a temple and celebrating King Solomon's temple is an allegory. The pursuit of Freemasonry is to build yourself into that house fit for his habitation.
Yeah.
That you have to discover the God, the divine within you. The whole point of that, the object of the second degree, what have you discovered? And where is it located? In the center. The center is you, in you.
Yeah.
So I think one has to keep that in mind.
I have a question for you, please, Bharat. So first thing, one thing to mention, I think it's on your presentation on the slides on page 24. You mention Descartes and various others, and you mentioned Plato, but there's a misspelling. It says Pluto, and I think it's supposed to say Plato. So just for you to correct that, I'm sure you probably want to.
Thank you. I hope it's not the Disney dog.
Yes. So I have a question for you, please. So in that presentation, you gave an incredible summary of all the various particular categorizations of the different aspects of mind, the different qualities in the body and the soul as well. But regarding mind, I'd like to ask, what are your personal feelings about mind? Do you believe that mind is a substance? And how would you describe your relationship to that substance?
First of all, Shane, thank you for correcting that Pluto and Plato business. I'll make that change. Number two, coming to your question, I don't believe that mind is a substance. I don't think so. The substance stays in the body. The mind is a chemical reaction of substances. You know, the mind is not something which is, you can, put your hand on it and say, this is mind, it's not that. Mind is not the same as the brain. So the mind is a chemical reaction of the physical substances in the body. This is what I would like to, think about.
Then could I ask you in that case, what of consciousness? Is consciousness therefore something different to mind?
See, again, in this case, there are two things which I mentioned earlier, the higher and the lower. If you extrapolate that from the mind to the higher, lower and the higher is leading towards the soul, which is indestructible. The Hindu philosophy believes that each living creature has some tidbit of God in him or her, or what it. That is the Atman, the soul. And the soul returns to the infinite. He's also known as Paramatma, which is first soul, so to speak. Param means first. Okay, Paramatma is first soul. So the soul goes back to Paramatma when its job is done in this particular material world. So that is the progress. So the mind leads to the two, higher self and the lower self. The lower self stays here. That is leading towards what you and I would consider as intelligence, ability to discern, to reason. That's again, it equated with the lower part is the brain, the higher part is the mind. The brain gives you the mechanism, the neurons, the whole works. But to synthesize that into some sort of action is what is the way that mind comes in. For example, if you want to talk about, say, a computer, the person feeding in data is feeding in data, but there is an algorithm in the computer which converts that data into some particular process, resulting in some action. I think that bridge is where the mind comes in. Okay. And then the next stage is the higher and lower self. The lower self is what stays within that, what we call the body. The higher self is what leads towards the Atma and goes on to the Paramatma when this particular life cycle is over. That is what I would like to, distinguish them.
Can I have a question from in here, please?
Yes, go ahead.
Very good. No, you have to wait. So, Mummy Assel's trying to push in already.
I just wanted to...
No, just wait you. So Alistair's on, and I would also like to follow on from what Alex said. What a fantastic... And it just goes to show, regardless of how kindly Bharat said, perhaps the West isn't... well, he was trying to be modest. No, we have no bloody idea at all at the depth to which the Indians have spent time and energy in dealing with these matters. And what I wanted to say was that very much to the point that people have just been talking about, which is death and mind. But what nobody's mentioned is the word memory. And in my opinion, and this is Alistair's opinion only, I believe that heaven and hell are different types of memory that you associate with people and what they've said and done during their lives. And so when the brain dies, we're not allowing for egregore, that thing that many of us have found when we meet together, where a group of people share this incredible something that each of them retains and will retain after they leave the egregore group or die. So the egregore kind of carries on. That's the first thing I wanted to say. And then this other thing, this memory. So we're talking about mind, which is fantastic, Bharat. But of course, we've completely missed the purpose of memory storing what's going on. And I believe that heaven, heaven is Madame Teresa and how well she's remembered for the good things she's did. And hell is the memory we have of Hitler and all the evil that he perpetrated. So there's two examples, in my opinion, of what I think is heaven and hell, and something that's been missing in what we were saying, the egregore. And earlier on, Bharat, I was very struck. Hinduism is full of stories, and not all of these stories have been deduced as to what they're designed to do. Obviously, they're for the children, a way of easily remembering philosophical and ethical things. But perhaps I'd like to ask Hassel and you, are there Hindu stories that dealt with the mind and perhaps memory? But overall, I thought I was stunned. Brilliant presentation. Nothing I would expect of Hassel, of Bharat. And I hand you back to him.
Thank you, Alistair, for those words. Just to answer that question about are there any stories dealing with the mind? There are. Yes, there are. From the Western point of view, you have Aesop's fables, which is the most simple, example of that. So there are these moral tales. They usually involve animals.
All right.
It's always a question of some animal with some particular trait. So the stories always revolve around some animals, some set of animals, and then there's an interaction between the two. But there's a moral lesson. And more important, there's a philosophical lesson behind it.
A philosophical lesson.
Yeah, that is important.
Right, thank you.
And as far as memory is concerned, there's also the idea of the collective memory. Like, for example, individual memories are different from the collective memory. From the Western point of view, the collective memory, as you mentioned about Hitler, that's no longer an individual memory. It's a collective memory of the Western civilization. So obviously it's going to have deep impact.
I haven't mentioned carving and writing. These are other ways of creating heaven and hell for the future, because once the memory is lost, future generations through writing and carving in stone or whatever else, so the person's life carries on.
You gave me something else to think about. Most of the invasions in India came from the northwest. So the invaders came from Central Asia, from the Middle
Iranians
East.
again.
No, whatever. They came from there. So the onslaught started from the northwest. Even Alexander came from the northwest, so it's not just them. But the idea is, what happened was, when they came as marauding tribes, they were interested not in land, they were interested in loot. What they could destroy, what they could carry away was their primary interest. Later on, others came to occupy, to conquer, and to rule. That came much later. But in the process, if you see, as we speak now, the ancient structures in the subcontinent of India, in the northern part, do not exist. There are no ancient structures going back to about beyond or earlier than 700. They've all been destroyed. But when you come deep south into the bottom of the peninsula, those ancient structures still exist, going back 2,000 years, 2,500, 3,000, 4,000 years old. The reason is that onslaught did not reach them. So when you talk about collective memory, the collective memory, and then you mentioned about carvings, the stone structures which are there in southern India do not exist in northern India. So what you see as important pilgrimage centers were built later, much, much later, and the common material used was brick.
Okay.
So the stone, I'm talking about the BC, before the
Indus.
Common Era. So there's all stone structures. So when you talk about carvings, there's that huge dichotomy there. So anyway, so that is off topic, sorry.
I think Hassel had questions.
Thank you, Bharat. My presentation, if I were ever doing a presentation like yours, would fit on the back of a Rizzler paper, cigarette paper. What you have provided is intense, deep understanding of both East and West, and try to marry them in a sort of sense that, you know, the difference is how you think, it's not what you think, how you interpret your thoughts. My thought was on something that is very, very much not thought about when we talk about the soul and the body, and it's the aura. Because I think that is the most important thing that we forget, because the aura to me, I think, is the soul, because it reflects you, your moods. Those who do Reiki and, you know, who sort of read the aura will tell you if you're in a bad mood, and, you know, the colors will show, because they can visually see that. And I think that our physical self rests within that aura, and the aura is the soul which protects us. It is like an indicator of your status or yourself. If you're stressed out, it will show. If you're going to do something wrong, the aura will change. The soul will reflect what your body is doing. Because why does the soul need to reside in an imperfect body? Yeah, it has everywhere else. So I think that we actually reside within the soul rather than the soul residing within us. And I think it was sometimes in certain parts of the Hindu scriptures as well, we see that in the mentions of the auras of the supreme, the deities as such. They're shown and hinted at that those powers and those images actually have external auras, which are the power, energy, and the guiding sources. I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, well, Hasu, thank you for that. Now you've put some more thoughts in my mind. I need to think about it. But yes, I do agree that the icons that you see in Hindu temples, the gods, the statues of the gods always have an aura around them, and the aura is. By looking at the aura, you know which god it is, because each god has a separate design of the aura. Okay. Yeah, so that's quite common. It's one of those things about imagery and what you mentioned about earlier about carvings. So there is more visual information conveyed when you look at something. But also to answer your question, I need to think about it, because you've given me something out of the, what's the word for in
comfort zone?
Yeah, out of my comfort zone. That's yes, absolutely.
Well done.
Yeah. Well done.
Thank you very much, both of you. And I just want to highlight, we have a comment in the comment section from Kush in Sydney. Consciousness versus mind, emergent consciousness versus consciousness apart from physical reality. And then he says the little c versus the big C, in relation to consciousness. And then there's a link to an article, I think it is, on intelligence and consciousness, in case people would like to copy that and then read that at their leisure. I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to that. I'll certainly take a look at that. Thank you, Kush, for adding that to the chat. And I mean, I'm really interested in this subject of consciousness and the potential for consciousness to connect beyond just our own individual consciousness, but the ability of consciousness to reach out and form connection with other kinds of conscious life. So we're surrounded by consciousness.
Yes.
We just aren't aware of it. And so I find that the subject of the all-pervading nature of consciousness very interesting. I wonder if you had any thoughts on this. Things like the use of the mind for telepathy and communication beyond words and beyond speech.
Yeah, and just to add to what the thread which you raised, as you know, if you look at the Hollywood films, take for example the Star Wars, those 9 movies. They talk about the Force. The Force is all around, Force is within you, and all that. How the good can influence that, how the bad also use the Force. I think that particular imagery or that particular reference could be part of this overall consciousness, and that every living being, even inanimate objects, have a consciousness. That the idea is that, therefore he says that the whole existence, the universe itself, has a force, and you have to tap into that force. So that could be one of the things you could take away from this idea of an overall consciousness. Similarly, if you look at the Harry Potter world, there also you have people drawing power from something else, not a substance. The idea of magic. The magic has been given all sorts of interpretations, across the world, across centuries. But basically, the magic is to create something out of nothing. That's the basic bottom line. So how do you create something out of nothing? So that's nothing is not because you're not perceived it. It's there. It's just that you are dumb. You don't know where it is. You can't perceive it, but it is there.
Illusion.
So that somebody else has, seen it and used that to make that, transformation from unreal to the real. So again, that's a question of tapping into that power which exists. That's, I would like to think in those channels.
I think you used the Hindu word Maya, illusion.
Illusion, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Bharat. We have a question in the chat from James. Is there anything that nourishes all components, body, mind, and soul? Would that be love as well as human nutrients?
Oh, human nutrients. I don't know about the human nutrients part of it, but love certainly, yes. But more important than that, I think, is perfect peace. I think one needs to be at peace with oneself. If you've got conflict in your mind and and you are at variance with 101 souls, there's no way you can be at peace with yourself. I think you need to be at peace with yourself to receive these, these neurons.
I've got 2 things to add, which I saved to the end. And one is Hermeticism. And it's all Bharat's fault, because he mentioned Greeks when we were talking about philosophy, and saying that the dear old Greeks gave us the nearest thing to the Hindu in-depth philosophy that really has impressed most of us here. And strangely enough, the Hermetic studies I'm doing for Sophia Hermetica, involving the Gimmi Figuren and the Hermetic secrets that are coming from it, go back to Cornelius Agrippa, and he said magic. There is a natural magic, and I believe exactly what you said, that it is something that is unconceived by others, but known by others through intelligence, memory, philosophy, and all those things. But of course, the thing that Agrippa says about natural magic is there are 3 types of natural magic. One is elemental, and all of us in the SRIA know all about the elemental elements of our first order. And the second world of natural magic was the celestial world And of course, Bharat mentioned those, the 7 planets and all the effects of the moon, the earth, the tides. You can include weather in that as well. But that is the second natural world, the world of the celestial. And the thing that I wasn't quite getting my head around, and today's my head was completely exploded by what Barrett has been talking about, was the third world of Agrippa was the philosophical or world mind. In other words, I was thinking before today that he was talking about if your mind conceives the celestial and elemental worlds, you're getting an idea of the true scope and scale of natural magic. Again, coming back to what you were talking about, that kind of natural magic. But it's clear that other people really did study the mind way beyond Plato. And I mean, because that's where the Hermetic tradition comes from.
Right.
And on that, I rest my case. That's all I had to say on that. Oh, as the secretary of Sophia Hermetica, you know, I rest.
As long as you don't.
No comment.
As long as you don't
Sorry, that was my fault. I was muted. Alex, in wherever you are, Alex, over to you.
Hi, Sheen. Just something that you said popped a thought into my head. I was reading a book the other day, quoting it from William James, who was sort of seen as sort of one of the kind of pioneers of Western psychological kind of theory. And he said in it, because you were talking about consciousness and what we consider conscious, and he was saying that there's a bit of a bias into considering human consciousness as the only consciousness, and that his invitation really was to consider that whilst we do have a human consciousness, that's not the only consciousness that necessarily needs to exist. Because if we think of consciousness in terms of collecting information, having the capacity to process that information, and then direct actions and behaviors, when you think trees signal to each other if there are threats, or feed each other if in terms of famine, or communicate through there are studies done on the noises animals make, and if they have meaning and significance. So William James had given a sort of invitation all those years ago to consider that we might be cutting ourselves short if we only look at things from the point of view of human consciousness, and if we could try to sort of step between the veils and consider that everything is possibly conscious, and if we could try and pick up little views of that through the veil out of the corner of our eye, it might help us understand our own consciousness in a different way. And there was one more little thing, is that Jung in his theory talked about the unconscious being teleological, and that there being a developmental sort of strive towards something that was very much what Barrett was describing as the sort of non-linear cyclical, you know, cycles of time and cycles of experience that keep on evolving, and we're vessels that it evolves through, and that possibly that the mind isn't really something that we hold with agency and purpose. Maybe it's just a bit of an empty crucible or a holder or a container, and thoughts get dropped into it if we're receptive and open enough to be able to have. So do we generate thoughts and ideas, and are we creating theories, or are they just being popped into us as we go along if we make ourselves available to that?
I think that's wonderful. I completely agree with your first point about consciousness and our kind of tendency to be a little bit self-centered, us human beings. And we think we've got a monopoly on consciousness, but we haven't at all. I completely agree with you. That's a subject I'd love to discuss at a great length, really. Maybe there's a theme there for a later study group meeting. Yeah, I think that this opens up such a huge area of exploration, really, because what about empathy? When it's not to do with conscious thought, but we get a sense of a connection or an understanding of something or of someone, or we may have an empathic connection with an animal, for instance, or even with a plant, with certain people who are sensitive. And those kind of empathic connections can be really, really real. They can be very deep and very meaningful. And we can learn a lot from developing our capacity to empathically connect with other people, other consciousness, really, I believe it is. And what was the second thing you were saying about, what was the second thing again, please?
Well, it was the mind, because I was actually
Yes.
Alex saying, make sure you like text Barrett, because I want to know all his references, because I want to know all of those amazing books he got, all of that, you know, the sort of the history of the Hindu approach to psychology and philosophy. I just wanted to read it. I wanted to use those and get references from it. But it made me think about two sort of current people that I studied and it was Bion and Jung, both of them. Their concept of the mind wasn't something that was owned by an individual, that was the site of it was the place where information was collected, and it was more of a structure of processes that had the capacity to then act on the information that came in. But it's not a site where I have had a thought, I've had a genius theory, I've had a wonderful thought. For both of them, they try to suggest that the mind is more of a sort of open container which develops through life, and it's dependent on sort of relational constructs which help that mind to develop. But the mind is a place, Bion, for instance, said the mind doesn't create thoughts, the mind is created in order to receive thoughts, which would suggest that there was a consciousness, perhaps like Jung's collective unconscious, that the knowledge and the understanding is there, it's out there, and we become receptacles to receive that rather than becoming creators of it. And it sort of changes the position of us as humans with our consciousness. It makes us less sort of, I don't know, territorial about the thoughts and ideas that we have. It gives us less ownership, and it gives us more of a sort of...
Yeah. Barrett, do you have any particular thoughts on this?
No, I'm just fascinated by what I just heard. But the thing is, no, when you talk earlier, you spoke about empathy. I think empathy is just one of the aspects of consciousness. Because you're conscious of your responsibility or your affection or your feeling of concern or care, it's an outlook, it is an outcome of your consciousness. If you're not conscious of yourself and the things that are surrounding you, I don't think you would have any empathy. For example, empathy could be not only, for example, you are a father, and your children, your wife, there's a certain concern that you have with them. It's automatic. So that's one stage. The other one is, suppose you have a dog. The master, the dog relationship is going back time immemorial. So again, all these are reflections of the consciousness that you have. You are aware of yourself. You're aware of your surroundings. And when you see something there, which triggers that mechanism, the response that you have. I think that's something which is beyond the categorization. It just happens.
Regarding
the reverse is true too, Shane, in the sense that the dog also has the same empathy with you. So it's not something which is human driven.
It's not consciousness.
It's consciousness driven. It's nothing to do with humanity.
Sheen, we've got another question from Hassel.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
It's an interesting conversation. And my thought went back to the concept, is a child born with a conscience, or are they born with instinct? And does the conscience develop as they grow? It's interesting that what does a child, when it's born, what does it do? It's instinctive, to be fed, to sleep. But slowly as you grow up, they start developing a conscience. They may like someone and go and hug them. They may not like you and they walk away or start crying. Do you develop conscience as you grow older, as you grow along in your life, or are you born with conscience and then it lightens up, or it becomes alive as you grow up. It walks with you. Yeah.
And I just wanted to throw into that debate the fact that I've found in the SRIA, the one thing we all share in common, including Brig, is that we have empathy, and in body language, 70% of what is communicated between two people is not language, it's something else. So, you know, I'd like to throw that into that discussion.
I fully agree with you, Alistair, what you just said. We are interacting on multiple levels, Sheen. It's not just a conversation. You know, I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, we are seeing our body language, we are seeing ourselves, you know, there's a certain relationship which we are establishing as we speak. So I think it has at multiple levels. It's not just an oral communication. I think it's much more than that. So consciousness is there. It's there. It's just that it's not defined. It's there.
Well, we're using that word to define it.
Yeah.
Is that definition bigger than the definition we're giving it?
I think we are only seeing a part of it. You know, that there's a very old, I was just talking earlier about animal fables to convey a message, a philosophical idea. So one of the most famous things which we as children are told is about the 5 blind men asked to look at an object and define and describe that object. So the 5 blind guys go and touch the various parts of an elephant. So one touches the foot of the elephant and says it's like a pillar. Another one touches the tail and says like a rope. Another one touches the ears and says like a flat dish. Another one touches the body and says it's like a barrel. And one touches the trunk and says it's like a snake. Now each one is correct, because that's what they've experienced, but they're not totally correct. So it's like that. We all perceive certain aspects of reality.
Yeah.
We assume that is the ultimate reality. So that's where the gap is. We can conceive of and assume, understand just a part of the total. You know, that's our confinement. We can't, you know, transcend that confinement.
Yeah, thank you, Bharat. Over to you, Alex.
Hi, I wanted to Hasu was your point, Hasu, was about, are we born with consciousness, or does it something that we develop along the way? And I wanted to tie that in with what Sheen was saying about empathy and consciousness. There is a theory that there's a really famous saying that a guy called Donald Winnicott said once, that says there's no such thing as a baby. And what he meant by that was, he said that the baby is a construct of the mind, of the consciousness of the mother and the father. It's held within that environment. And if you observe babies in the first 6 months of their lives, they really don't display or there is no sort of explicit conscious. They become conscious in the first 6 months. And there's lots of sort of developmental studies around that, watching that emerge, which is quite a beautiful thing to experience. And neurologically, from neuroscientific point of view, the part of the brain that they first used to function is the brain stem, which is the instinctual survival, and then the limbic center, which covers it. Then the limbic center is the feeling center, the empathy that Sheen was talking about, where you feel before you think. Thoughts come after feelings, and there's a lovely guy called Damasio who's written a book called Descartes' Error, and he talks about where thoughts come from, and that the feelings come from the body. That's the first part that we register, and then we translate those feelings into thoughts, which we can then communicate and share like this, like we're doing now. So a baby does interact, but I would say that the baby interacts with a potential consciousness that isn't quite developed, but it interacts on an empathic level, which is based around feeling, which is, as you said, Bharat, you said that your dog has empathy with you. A horse can feel if you're nervous or not. So I do think there is a slight, possibly there's a slight difference in empathy and consciousness. And I think, you know, based on development of very small humans, they have a potential. They have a potential to fill that space. But it starts off with physical sensations translated into emotional feelings, which are translated empathically with their environment. They can feel the environment that they're in. Later they become thought, and with thought and language, we can start discussing things at a level that's more conscious of ourselves, our place, where we are and where everybody else is. So.
Yeah, Shiraz, thank you. Are you familiar, or any of you familiar with the work of a man called James French? He teaches something called the trust technique, which is all to do with, he does a lot of work with animals, all different kinds of animals, and animals that have been mistreated or behavioral difficulties and so on. And in the trust technique, it's all about presence. It's about not overthinking, letting go of the thinking mind to arrive in the present moment and just be. So that if we're in the company of, say, an animal that's been traumatized or is very skittish, that he puts it like this, that when the person enters into this state of presence, where they're not trying to communicate with the animal, they're just being comfortable in their own being in that moment, in their own center, that the animal is reassured by that, and it reduces the thinking levels in the animal. This is the way he puts it. And the goal is to develop this ability to just be present in one's own center and comfortable and present in the breath that we're breathing, not thinking, just being, and that the animal perceives that we're not in this thinking state. And then it allows them to let go of the tendency for confused thinking, like trying to work out what's going on. And it gives them space to just relax and be. And there are videos of him working that I really recommend people to take a look at. And there's one where he's teaching this technique to a lady who she teaches horse riding, and she's spent her whole life working with horses. And there was a horse that she was trying to work with that had some kind of trauma, and she was trying to reassure it. So he was working with her, and she's when she starts to get a handle on this particular technique, she starts to understand it, and she's working with it, and she's sitting on the back of this horse. And the horse starts to relax, and then they're trotting around, and he keeps reminding her to let go of the thinking mind and return back into that present feeling of just being, not overthinking. And then just to imagine in her mind's eye that as the horse is trotting along, that it veers off to the right. And she hasn't said a single word, but the horse knows that it wants to go to the right. And then she changes the line in her mind, and the horse follows that other line. So there's some kind of communication that takes place there that's nothing to do with words. It's not steering the mechanics of the body of the horse. There's something else that takes place there, some other form of communication.
What was the name, Shane?
The man's name is James French, and if you do a search for the trust technique, I highly recommend it. He's a lovely soul, very deeply into that work, and there are some wonderful, wonderful videos of him working with animals with this particular technique, which, again, it has to do with consciousness, in my opinion, and empathy, and the ability to sense and feel and connect with another being, another conscious, sentient form of life.
Right. Can I just say one thing? I can't find the raise hand anymore, but speaking of consciousness and when it may enter, there are those who remember being born and are conscious at birth and right after, as far as being a baby and what type of consciousness. That just came to mind.
Bharat, any thoughts on this?
I don't know. Maybe maybe those people that she referred to, the Christian Anne she referred to, is people who had something that they achieved in their earlier lives. You know, they carried forward that particular achievement, or what should I say, knowledge. You know, so it goes back to the cyclical story which we all talked about. You know, that everything happens in cycles, even your birth, rebirth, and all that stuff. So sometimes great minds probably carry forward their previous birth. You know, we keep reading about people saying, "Oh, I was this in my previous life. I was this in my previous life." You know, so there are those exceptions to the rule. So it challenges commonly held beliefs. Let me put it that way. You know.
But Bharat, don't you often think, what makes me smile when people talk about their previous life is they often say, "Oh, I was Pharaoh, I was Caesar, I was Hannibal." Nobody ever says, "I was the guy who was making the bricks," or "I was the cleaner in the corner," or they were always some great hero of history.
Alex, you and I know that they are more delusional people than realists.
And Shiraz, I just want to raise the grandfather card and don't want to offend you, but that philosopher, did he ever ask grandparents whether they thought that there was no such thing as a baby? Because we get handed them often.
You're part of the baby matrix, Alex.
Yeah. There's definitely a baby, let me tell you.
You're making the baby.
I know what the nappies.
I just before we kind of wind up for the evening, I've mailed my paper and the PPT to Alistair. So if any of you wish to have a copy, please ask Alistair for that. And I must place on record my sincere thanks to Brother Rinesh Hegde from Bangalore. It is he who converted my paper into the PPT with all those images.
Very good.
Yeah,
Very
so
good,
he deserves the credit for that.
Well, that's wonderful. So let's send him our thanks, Bharat, next time you speak to him.
Certainly, I will do that.
I have one thing I'd like to just say before we finish as well, please, Bharat. Do we know all there is to know about mind and consciousness? Do we assume that we know? Is it a finite thing? Or
no. Shane, I have no hesitation to stop you right there and say that we know very little about it.
Yes.
The mind thinks.
I think the more we think we know, the less we actually know.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. I believe that it's likely that in some time over the next several decades, we are going to discover more and more about consciousness and what it is. And a lot of the preconceptions and assumptions that we have made about what it is are going to be broken.
Yes, I agree with you. I think we're just scratching the proverbial tip of the proverbial iceberg.
Yeah, and that's exciting, eh?
Yeah.
Sweating balls.
Yeah, indeed.
So does anybody else have anything they'd like to ask or comments before we finish for today? Please go ahead. Feel free to speak.
Just to say a wonderful thank you, Bharat, because that was just a fantastic paper and really thoroughly researched and thoroughly enjoyable, and just thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for your patience and thank you for your feedback, because that has given me things to think about further. And especially Brother Hasu always throws in that thing from the outfield. It comes.
So
yeah, on behalf of the Metropolitan Study Group of the SRAA, Frater Bharat, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. Thanks to everyone joining us wherever you are in the world. We'll be back again in May, third Saturday in May, same time, 2:30 p.m. British time. And yeah, lots of love to everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Take good care wherever you are. And,
see you on Wednesday.
See you soon. Yes.
Yeah. See you on Wednesday.
I look forward to that very much.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye bye.